The action takes place in the late 19th century, at a train station in eastern India, as the main characters awaits another train bound for Calcutta.
My friend and I were returning to Calcutta from our trip when we met the man in a train. From his style of dressing and bearing we took him at first for a Muslim from northern India, but we were puzzled as we heard him talk. He had a humongous knowledge on various subjects. Be the topic ever so trivial, he would quote science, or comment on the Vedas, or repeat quatrains from some Persian poet. And as we had no pretense to a knowledge of science or the Vedas or Persian, our admiration for him went on increasing. And my friend, a theosophist, was firmly convinced that our fellow passenger must have been supernaturally inspired by some strange magnetism or occult power, by an astral body or something of that kind. While he was listening to what the man said, he secretly took down notes of his conversation. The man was so magnetic that he has gathered attention from all the passengers around and had them glued to his every word. He was a skilled storyteller and had much number of tales to spin and entertain them with. When the train reached the junction, we gathered in the waiting room for the connection. It was almost 10 p.m., and as the train we heard, was likely to be very late, owing to something wrong in the lines. I spread my bed on the table and was about to lie down for a comfortable nap, when the extraordinary person deliberately set about spinning the yarn. He slowly launches into his own story. Of course, I could get no sleep that night.
When, owing to a disagreement about some questions of administrative policy, I threw up my post at Junagadh, and entered the service of the Nizam of Hydria, they appointed me at once, as a strong young man, collector of cotton tax at Barrack. Barrack is a lovely place. The river Shusta flows over stony ways and babbles on the pebbles, tripping, like a skillful dancing girl, in through the woods below the lonely hills. 150 steps from the river, at the foot of the hills, was a solitary marble palace. There were no houses around it, the village and the cotton market of Barrack being far off. About 250 years ago, the Emperor Mahmud Shah II built the palace for his pleasure and luxury. In his days, its fountains spurted rosewater, and on the cold marble floors of its spray-cooled rooms young Persian girls would sit, singing, and splashing their soft naked feet in the water of the reservoirs. The fountains play no longer, the songs have ceased, no longer do snow-white feet step gracefully on the snowy marble. Now, it has become quarters of tax collectors like us, men oppressed with solitude and deprived of the society of women. Now, Karim Khan, the old clerk of my office, warned me repeatedly not to stay at the palace.
"Pass the day there, if you like,"
said he,
"but never stay the night. The house had such a bad name that even thieves would not venture near it after dark."
I passed it off with a light laugh. The servants said that they would work till dark and go away at night. I gave my ready assent. At first the solitude of the deserted palace weighed upon me like a nightmare. I would stay out, and work hard as long as possible, then return home at night jaded and tired, go to bed and fall asleep. Before a week had passed, the place began to exert a weird fascination upon me. It is difficult to describe or to induce people to believe. But I felt as if the whole house was like a living organism, slowly and imperceptibly digesting me by the action of some stupefying gastric juice. Perhaps I had this sensation as soon as I set my foot in the house, but I distinctly remember the day on which I first was conscious of it. It was the beginning of summer, and the market being dull, I had no work to do. A little before sunset I was sitting near the water's edge below the steps. The Shusta had shrunk and sunk low. The pebbles at the bottom of the clear shallow waters were shining with a sparkling light. There was not a breath of wind anywhere. As the sun sank behind the hilltops, I thought of going out for a ride, and was about to get up when I heard a footfall on the steps behind. I looked back, but there was no one. As I sat down again, thinking it to be an illusion, I heard many footfalls, as if a large number of people were rushing down the steps. I saw a group of joyous maidens coming down the steps to bathe in the Shusta in that summer evening. Not a sound was in the valley, in the river, or in the palace, to break the silence, but I distinctly heard the maidens laugh, as they ran past me, towards the river, without noticing me at all. As they were invisible to me, so was I to them. The river was perfectly calm, but I felt that its still, shallow, and clear waters were stirred suddenly by the splash. The girls laughed and dashed and spattered water at one another. I felt a thrill at my heart. I couldn't distinguish whether the excitement was due to fear or delight or curiosity. I had a strong desire to see them more clearly, but nothing was visible before me. I thought I could get all that they said, if I only strained my ears, but however hard I strained them, I heard nothing but the chirping of the cicadas in the woods. Then suddenly a strong wind rippled the waters, and swept away the ghostly presence of the maidens. Call it reality or dream, the momentary glimpse of that invisible optical illusion reflected from a far-off world, 250 years old, vanished in a flash. Next morning, when I woke up, the experience appeared as a strange fantasy. With a light heart, I put on my hat and drove out to my work. I was to have written my quarterly report that day, and expected to return late, but before it was dark, I was strangely drawn to the house. By what I could not say, I felt they were all waiting, and that I should delay no longer. Leaving my report unfinished, I rose, put on my hat, and left to get back home. I reached the vast silent palace, standing on the gloomy skirts of the hills. On the first floor, the stairs led to a very spacious hall, its roof stretching wide over ornamental arches, resting on 3 rows of massive pillars, and groaning day and night, under the weight of its own intense solitude. The day had just closed, and the lamps had not yet been lighted. As I pushed the door open, a great bustle seemed to follow within, as if a throng of people had broken up in confusion, and rushed out through the doors, and windows, and corridors, and verandas and rooms, to make its hurried escape. As I saw no one, I stood bewildered, and a faint scent of perfume lingered in my nostrils. Standing in the darkness of that vast hall between the rows of those ancient pillars, I could hear the gurgle of fountains plashing on the marble floor, a strange tune on the guitar, the jingle of ornaments and the tinkle of anklets, the clang of bells tolling the hours, the din of the crystal pendants of chandeliers shaken by the breeze, all creating around me a strange unearthly music. Then I came under such a spell, that this intangible, inaccessible, unearthly vision appeared to be the only reality in the world, and all else a mere dream. At that moment, my servant entered with a lighted kerosene lamp in his hand, kept it on the table and left the place. I sat over the newspaper at my camp table, lighted by the kerosene lamp. After I had finished my paper, and eaten my Mughlai dinner, I put out the lamp, and lay down on my bed in a small side room. I do not know when I fell asleep, or how long I slept, but I suddenly awoke with a start, though I heard no sound and saw no intruder, only the steady bright star on the hilltop had set, and the dim light of the new moon was stealthily entering the room through the open window, as if ashamed of its intrusion. I saw nobody, but felt as if someone was gently pushing me. As I awoke she said not a word, but gestured me, with her 5 fingers bedecked with rings, to follow her cautiously. I got up noiselessly, and, though no soul was there to save me in the countless apartments of the deserted palace with its slumbering sounds and waiting echoes, I feared at every step lest anyone should wake up. Most of the rooms of the palace were always kept closed, and I had never entered them. I followed breathless and with silent steps. Though I could not see my fair guide, her form was not invisible to my mind's eye. An Arab girl, her arms hard and smooth as marble, visible through her sleeves, a thin veil, falling on her face, from the fringe of her cap, and a curved dagger at her waist. I thought that one of the 1001 Arabian Nights had been wafted to me from the world of romance. And when at last, my fair guide stopped suddenly before a blue screen, she seemed to point to something below. There was nothing there, but a sudden dread froze the blood in my heart, and I saw a terrible eunuch, dressed in rich brocade, sitting and dozing with outstretched legs, with a naked sword on his lap. As with trembling heart I made an attempt to step across the outstretched legs of the eunuch, he woke up suddenly with a start, and the sword fell from his lap with a sharp clang on the marble floor. A terrific scream made me jump, and I was sitting on my bed, sweating heavily. Such was the abrupt close of one of my Arabian Nights, but there were yet 1,000 nights left. During the day, I went back to work, tired from my strange experiences of the night before. But in the evening when I returned, I looked forward to these experiences. Repeatedly, I became a person from an earlier age who takes part in unwritten history, wearing an English coat, breeches, and red velvet cap in anticipation of a meeting with the beloved one. In pursuit of her, I would wander from room to room in the palace, to see what would happen next. Sometimes, while dressing myself as a royal prince, I would catch a glimpse of the Persian beauty in the mirror. But in a moment she would disappear. At such times, I would go to bed and fall asleep as a serpent entwined me. One evening, I decided to go out on my horse. My English hat and coat were resting on a rack, and I was about to take them down, when a sudden whirlwind, crested with the sands of the Shusta, and the dead leaves of the hills, caught them up and whirled them round and round, while a loud peal of merry laughter rose higher and higher, striking all the chords, till it died away in the land of sunset. I could not go out for my ride, and the next day I gave up my queer English coat and hat for good. That day again, at dead of night, I heard the stifled heartbreaking sobs of someone. As if below the bed, below the floor, below the stony foundation of the gigantic palace, from the depths of a dark damp grave, a voice piteously cried and implored me.
Rescue me. Break these doors of our illusion. Death lies slumber in fruitless dreams. Place by your side on the saddle. Press me to your heart, and, riding through hills, and woods, and across the river, take me to the warm radiance of your sunny rooms above.
I wondered who she is. Where she came from. I envisioned an Arab kidnapping her from her mother, and taking her to a slave market, where a man buys her for his master's harem. Then I saw the master, a great king, worshipping at her feet, while the eunuch with the sword stands nearby. Suddenly at this moment I heard a scream out of Meher Ali, a madman who is sometimes seen near the palace.
Stand back, all is false, all is false.
I opened my eyes and saw that it was already light. My assistant came and handed me my letters, and the cook waited with a salam for my orders. I said, "No, I can stay here no longer." That very day I packed up, and moved to my office. Old Karim Khan smiled a little as he saw me. I felt annoyed, but said nothing, and fell to my work. As evening approached, I grew absent-minded. I felt as if I had an appointment to keep, and the work of inspecting the cotton account seemed completely useless. Even the Nizamat of the Nizam did not appear to be of much worth. Whatever belonged to the present, whatever was moving and acting and working for bread seemed insignificant, meaningless, and hateful. I threw my pen down, closed my register, got into my dog-cart, and drove away. I noticed that it stopped of itself at the gate of the marble palace just at the hour of twilight. With quick steps I climbed the stairs, and entered the room. A heavy silence was reigning within. The dark rooms were looking sullen as if they had taken offense. My heart was full of guilt, but there was no one to whom I could lay it bare, or of whom I could ask forgiveness. I wandered about the dark rooms with a vacant mind. I wished I had a guitar to which I could sing to the unknown. Suddenly, 2 teardrops fell from overhead on my brow. Dark masses of clouds overcast the top of the Avali hills that day. The gloomy woods and the sooty waters of the Shusta were waiting in terrible suspense and in an ominous calm. Suddenly, land, water, and sky shivered, and a wild tempest blast rushed howling through the distant pathless woods, showing its lightning teeth like a raving enthusiast who had broken his chains. The halls of the palace banged their doors, and moaned in the bitterness of anguish. The servants were all in the office, and there was no one to light the lamps. The night was cloudy and moonless. In the dense gloom within, I could distinctly feel that a woman was lying on her face on the carpet below the bed, clasping and tearing her long disheveled hair with desperate fingers. Blood was trickling down her fair brow, and she was now laughing a hard, harsh, mirthless laugh, now bursting into violent ringing sobs, as the wind roared in through the open window, and the rain poured in torrents and soaked her through and through. All night there was no cessation of the storm or of the passionate cry. I wandered from room to room in the dark, with unavailing sorrow. And the madman cried out,
Stand back, all is false, all is false.
I saw that the day had dawned, and Meher Ali was going round and round the palace, with his usual cry, in that dreadful weather. Suddenly it came to me that perhaps he also had once lived in that house, and that, though he had gone mad, he came there every day and went round and round fascinated by the weird spell cast by the marble demon. Despite the storm and rain, I ran to him and asked, "Oh, Meher Ali, what is false?" The man answered nothing, but pushing me aside went round and round with his frantic cry, like a bird flying fascinated about the jaws of a snake, and made a desperate effort to warn himself by repeating,
Stand back, all is false, all is false.
I ran like a madman through the pelting rain to my office, and asked Karim Khan, "Tell me the meaning of all this." What I gathered from that old man was this, that at one time countless unrequited passions and unsatisfied longings and lurid flames of wild blazing pleasure raged within that palace. And that the curse of all the heartaches and blasted hopes had made its every stone thirsty and hungry, eager to swallow up like a famished ogress any living man who might chance to approach. Not one of those, who lived there for 3 consecutive nights could escape these cruel jaws, save Meher Ali, who had escaped at the cost of his reason. I asked, "Is there no means for me to get released?" The old man said,
There is only one means, and that is very difficult. I will tell you what it is, but first you must hear the history of a young Persian girl who once lived in that pleasure dome. A stranger or a more bitterly heart-rending tragedy was never enacted on this earth.
Just at this moment the coolies announced that the train was coming. So soon? We hurriedly packed up our luggage, as the tram steamed in. An English gentleman, apparently just aroused from slumber, was looking out of a first-class carriage endeavoring to read the name of the station. As soon as he caught sight of our fellow passenger, he cried,
"Hello!"
and took him into his own compartment. As we got into a second-class carriage, we had no chance of finding out who the man was or what was the end of his story. I said, "The man evidently took us for fools and imposed upon us out of fun. The story is pure fabrication from the beginning to finish." The discussion that followed ended in a lifelong rupture between my theosophist friend and me.
This story illustrates Tagore's sense of humor when it comes to the conventions of the narrative form. It speaks of Tagore's narrative playfulness. Just as the story is getting really good, just as the storyteller is about to tell us how he escaped the Shah's palace, we, the people who are listening to the story, must get off the train. Our pleasure as readers mirrors the storyteller's pleasure in the fantasies, tempted, but never truly fulfilled.